We're honored to invite Dr. Barrington Walker to introduce our keynote speaker. As a recent member of McMaster University, Dr. Walker is the Vice Provost of Equity and Inclusion and a Professor of History. Dr. Walker plays a pivotal role in Black Canadian Studies, particularly as a member of the drafting team of the Scarborough National Charter on Anti-Racism and Black Inclusion in Canadian Studies. Please welcome with me, Dr. Walker.
Thank you, everybody. I'd like to congratulate the conference organizers on a successful, highly successful event that's been well attended and has generated all kinds of interesting discussion. And it's my distinct honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Abdul Alkalimat. So Dr. Abdul Alkalimat, born Gerald A. McWorter, is a founder of the field of Black Studies in the United States. And he's the author of more than 20 books and hundreds of articles. Among them is his 1984 book, The Canonical Text, Introduction to Afro-American Studies, a People's College Primer. A lifelong scholar and activist with a PhD from the University of Chicago, he has lectured, taught, and directed academic programs across the US, the Caribbean, Africa, Europe, and China. His recent works include The History of Black Studies, published in 2021, Dialectics of Liberation, The African Liberation Support Movement, published in 2022, and The Future of Black Studies, published also in 2022. Dr. Alkalimat has led much of his intellectual work at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. Many call him a comrade because of his work in activism during the most pivotal Black struggles of the 20th century. Dr. Alkalimat is recognized for his contributions to the freedom movement, the Black Power and Pan-Africanist movements, spreading the word and the method of Malcolm X, the anti-capitalist struggle, as well as currently being part of the Black Left Committee to rebuild Black liberation movement. Some of his early contributions were serving as former chair of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, at the Chicago chapter, as a founding member of the African Liberation Support Committee, and as the founder of a myriad of Black cultural and educational organizations. Alongside Dr. Vincent Harding, Dr. Alkalimat was one of the founders of the Institute of the Black World, which accelerated anti-colonial politics domestically and internationally through research, publishing, and organizing. Building on his experience, Dr. Alkalimat went on to establish the People's College and the Black Radical Congress, which led to Chicago's COM University, one word, C-O-M-M, University, the Illinois Council for Black Studies, and the Organization of Black American Culture. He is now Professor Emeritus of African American Studies and Information Sciences at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Between his organizing, activism, and scholarship, Dr. Alkalimat has truly lived a life of Black studies. We are honored to welcome the renowned activist and scholar as our keynote speaker for today's event. His address is titled Black Studies, Africana Studies, Lessons for Canada, and will serve as an opportunity for intergenerational and transnational knowledge transfer and exchange. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Abdul Alkalimat.
Well, thank you for that very generous introduction. And let me start this talk by proclaiming the slogan of the moment, Free Palestine. First of all, I'd like to thank Alpha and Rhonda for not only inviting me, but the sisterly love they've expressed in hosting me. I have thoroughly enjoyed thus far my stay. I appreciate this opportunity to share our experience. I think we need a different slide up here. There you go. I appreciate this opportunity to share our experience in the US and to join with you in thinking about Black studies in Canada. This is something I hope to learn more about, as I have been today. Each country, even each campus, has its particularity. So we have to be mindful that one approach doesn't fit all situations. And I certainly want to avoid the all too frequent line of thinking that represents American exceptionalism. On the other hand, we can all learn from each other. The conference form, a collective process of intellectual production and consumption, is canonical in history. This is the subject of my next book, to rescue the concept of the canon from the individual text to the collectively produced discourse of a conference. So I consider what we're doing here today to be very important. Now, the people on this first slide are representative of the Canadian Black experience, and I included them to honor that experience. I come to this talk with respect for you, my Canadian sisters and brothers. We're really one people, bound together in our freedom struggle as represented by the freedom seekers of the Underground Railroad. Now, my great-granduncle, Frank McWorter Jr., did so in 1826 as he escaped from Kentucky and sought freedom in Essex, Ontario, something I will soon do more research on, hoping someone might here might help out. We might think about the current mass immigration movements in the world as a continuation of the Underground Railroad, as people are moving illegally in search of freedom and a better life from throughout Africa and the African diaspora. So wherever we end up, the struggle must continue. A luta continua. In 1966, a clarion call for Black liberation was made with the slogan Black Power, issued on a Mississippi march. This required self-reliance. It represented a turn towards self-determination as a road to freedom. Brothers and sisters in Canada and the United States were once again united in the freedom struggle. As an example of the iconic status of a conference, we have to point to the 1968 Congress of Black Writers at McGill University. It focused on Canada, but was a statement for the African diaspora. And it pointed to the campus as a site of struggle, notably the 1969 Sir George Williams fight against institutional racism. The roots of Black studies are in struggle in the United States and indeed in Canada as well. In the US, we always remember the great icons of Black power, the great Frederick Douglass in the 19th century and Brother Malcolm in the 20th century. Of course, there's so many others that could be mentioned. In the curriculum we develop, their experiences should be remembered. Perhaps the most iconic Black studies scholar is W.E.B. Du Bois. Du Bois succeeded in mainstream academic work at Berlin and Harvard, demonstrating that Black scholars were worthy at the highest standards of Western scholarship. Relevant today, Du Bois set a high standard with his research and interpretation of the Black experience. He did history, especially on the slave trade and the Reconstruction. He did sociology, especially on class and the urban experience. He did literature, especially with his novels and poetry. He organized others to do Black studies, especially his journal work and his iconic Atlanta conferences. He performed as a public intellectual, especially his Pan-African activism. And he cared for the children with his monthly Brownies book. His work remains foundational for us today. But there were so many more, and all of it has been represented by the bibliographers. So here's what I will be talking about. First, the history of Black studies in the United States. Second, the future challenges we face. And then lastly, on that basis, I might suggest some lessons for you to consider. Let's start with a general definition of what I consider to be Black studies. Black studies includes these 5 things. 1, that study and teach about African Americans, including Africans and other African descendant people. 2, where Black people themselves are the main agents or protagonists of the study and learning, not exclusively, but primarily. That counter racism and contribute to human liberation, that celebrate the Black experience. And Black Studies presents an analysis of the economies, cultures, and politics of the American hemisphere and Western Europe from the perspective of people of African descent. This is first and foremost based on what Black people do in their intellectual and cultural lives, something we are now working on within mainstream institutions. In my book, The History of Black Studies, I argue that there have been 3 manifestations we need to study: Black studies as intellectual history, Black studies as social movement, and Black studies as academic profession. Now, Black intellectual history involves those path-breaking academics who navigated success in mainstream institutions and attained PhD degrees on research that expanded knowledge of the Black experience. It also involves the community initiatives in creating libraries, museums, art galleries, literary societies, rituals of public history, and cultural performance. What was created was a political culture anchored in ideological diversity. Now, here in this slide are some of the great faculty who led Howard University. From the left to right: James Nabreth, Charles Drew, Sterling Brown, E. Franklin Frazier, Rayford Logan, and Elaine Locke. This generation of scholars led in the struggle to open the curriculum to Black perspectives from the singular domination of Eurocentrism. For example, here's what the Fisk University curriculum required. The HBCU, Fisk University, required. The foundation was in Greece and Rome. By 1900, Howard University in Washington, D.C., required of graduates 4 years of Latin and 2 years of Greek. So the fight against limiting our curriculum to Eurocentrism actually begins in the HBCUs. The common thinking is that African studies began at Northwestern University in Chicago under the anthropologist Melville Horskowitz in 1948. That's simply not the case. African studies began at Fisk University in 1943 under the linguist Mark Hanna Watkins, before he joined the faculty at Howard University, being there from 1947 to 1972. But Black studies as intellectual history came out of the community as much as it did institutions of higher education. Bookstores, mentioned earlier, bookstores were a great resource for the community, enabling the distribution of publications about the Black experience, especially publications being created out of their own community. In this slide, you can see the National Memorial African Bookstore that was the main bookstore in Harlem, New York. This revealed a tradition of ideological frameworks for Black intellectual thinking. So what is ideology? In a way, it's the understanding of the world or society, but also includes advocacy to maintain or change things. Now, in our experience, there are 5 main ideological frameworks that map Black intellectual history: Pan-Africanism, nationalism, liberation theology, feminism, or as Alice Walker would say, womanism, and socialism. They are distinct on an analytical level, but in actual practice, people link multiple frameworks in the stages their lives pass through. These ideological frameworks become clear in the next major way that Black studies has been performed within social movements. My summation is that there have been 6 major kinds of social movements. Workers have been the foundation of each of these movements. Maybe something is happening new now, that's a subject of research, your research. The freedom movement, the Black Power movement, the Black Arts movement, the New Communist movement, Black Women's movement, and the Black Student movement. Now, my argument is that an action-oriented Black Studies curriculum was developed in these social movements on two levels: popular education for the broader community and an intense education for what we can call cadre development, activists who become transformed and committed to sustaining the struggle over time and organizing. I'll just mention a few examples. At the heart of the freedom movement, often renamed the civil rights movement, were freedom schools set up to counter the miseducation being forced on Black children and adults as well. An example, of course, is the SNCC activists who were the cadre for developing these schools, especially in Mississippi. Black history and Black literature were always in the curriculum of the freedom schools, but almost never in the public schools of the South. The civil rights movement, the name given to the freedom movement, was transformed in the 60s by the emergence of Black Power. Now, Malcolm X Liberation University is an example of the educational emergent institutions set up by the activists of the Black Power movement. The founder, shown here in this slide, is Howard Fuller, known also as Owusu Sudoku, with Dwight Hopkins, who was president of the African-American Student Society at Duke University. The struggle at Duke led to the formation of Malcolm X Liberation University. Their orientation was to train students with the technical and cultural skills needed to work at the community grassroots level in Africa and local communities in the US. As is obvious by their name, their inspiration and guidance came from Malcolm X. Another example of this Black Power moment is the East and their Uhuru Sasa Independent School. A whole national network of local independent schools, such as Uhuru Sasa, was set up and organized as an alternative system of such institutions. Its founder was J2 Weusi, also known as Leslie Campbell, a former public school teacher. He fought the racist discrimination in New York public schools and decided to establish this independent set of organizations as a move for Black self-determination. Now, the Black Arts movement not only performed and celebrated the Black experience, but institutions were established and journals were created to educate the public and to build a way for Black cultural activists to be educated and nurtured. Here's Barbara Ann Teer, founder of the National Black Theater and the important journal that collectivized Black theater activists. Building audience for the arts in the Black community was key. As a working class community, this was always connected to building a movement of Black workers. Now, left-wing resurgence for the entire country was led by militant Black workers in Detroit, Michigan, the League of Revolutionary Black Workers. One of the first things they did was establish a bookstore and a publishing program to educate the public about the economic exploitation they were experiencing. Now, students at Wayne State University in Detroit who supported the League seized the student newspaper and put out an issue for the League with the headline, that one class-conscious Black worker was worth 100 students. A class-conscious worker is a cadre in the class struggle. Note on the left of this slide, they had newsletters in each of the factories that League activists were in. Drum, the Dodge Revolutionary Union Movement, Uprum, United Parcel Revolutionary Union Movement. In other words, the core concept was a collective in each workplace that was connected to the broader strategy of the League. Note on the left of this slide, they had the newsletter in each of the factories, and then there was on the right, General Baker, and yes, their parents named that brother General. The movie made about the League finally got the news, because there was a chant at the UAW, the United Auto Workers Convention, that we finally got the news about how our dues are being used. And UAW means you ain't white. The movie made about the League finally got the news, became a requirement in many Black studies programs. The silence of the Black working masses was finally broken. Google the film, it's online, you can check it right now. This was extended to women. Black women were never silent. They'd always played key roles in every movement, in every organization. The journal here in the middle of this slide, Triple Jeopardy, Racism, Imperialism, and Sexism, was created by the Third World Women's Alliance. They came out of a women's caucus of SNCC, as represented in this slide in the upper left by Fran Beal. This is what Fran said, quote, "I was in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. You're talking about liberation and freedom half the night, and then on the racial side, and then all of a sudden men are going to turn around and start talking about putting you in your place." So in 1968, we founded the SNCC Black Women's Liberation Committee to take up some of these issues, end of quote. And that led to Third World Women's Alliance. Also on the right is Audre Lorde, a leader of the Black LGBTQ emergence as its own movement for liberation, but intimately connected to the movement by Black people, by women in general, by artists, and by workers. So Black Studies was born in the HBCUs, the Black community, and Black social movements. It was in the last 60s that in the latter part of the 60s, that forced its way into mainstream educational institutions. The Black Power movement erupted into mainstream institutions of higher education. Black students forced a crisis that created Black studies. Black Power and the assassination of Martin Luther King led to a great enrollment of Black students into institutions of higher education. Now here in this slide is an incident at San Francisco State, and on the right at Cornell University, in the pivotal years of 1968, 1969. First-generation college students, inspired by the Black Power movement, entered colleges, faced institutional racism, and then disrupted by seizing buildings and forcing change. And this led to Black studies entering the mainstream and beginning its transformation into an academic profession. And this has been happening in 6 stages. Social disruption, militant action that forced change, building consensus, building a common language and conceptual frameworks. You know, we fought our way into the conference room, they were sitting around and they said, "What do you want?" And our answer was, "What do you got?" And they said, "Well, we have sociology, we want Black sociology. We have literature, we want Black literature." Then when we left the meeting, we had to look at each other and said, "What the hell is that?" You know, and figure that out. So we then had to develop a common language and conceptual framework. Third, building institutions, creating organizations, centers, institutes, committees, programs, and departments. 4, establishing the profession, creating PhD degree programs, journals, tenure-track faculty positions, professional organizations, all based on peer review. That means self-governance. 5, theorizing, theories that establish conceptual frameworks within which we could have some intellectual coherence to what we were doing. And then norming research, common methodological practices, and empirical data foci. Now these are general stages, and each institution has its own particular path and timing. And we need a history of each of these institutions. As Black Studies, it's one of the main achievements of the Black Power movement. If you don't document it, it doesn't exist. And while we always entered Black Studies programs claiming allegiance to history, we then didn't write our own history. And that's something we have to correct. Now, norms of institutional racism were shoved aside by the militant motion of Black students. This brought Black power from their community into the campus and called it the campus's moral and intellectual integrity into question. Now, Black Studies has developed legitimacy in the eyes of students over the last few decades. This slide shows the degrees granted in Black Studies each year in the US, according to the National Center for Educational Statistics, getting as high as over 1,000. So people are taking Black Studies and are getting degrees in Black Studies. There are also several professional organizations representing Black Studies. The oldest, of course, is the ASALH, the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, which was founded in 1915. And then the National Council for Black Studies, NCBS, founded in 1975. And another major organization of note, especially in terms of digital representation of scholarship, is the African American Intellectual History Society, founded in 2014. These professional organizations are where one meets peers and builds networks of Black Studies professionals, faculty, and graduate students. The first research expectation for a Black Studies academic professional is the PhD degree. Many move into Black Studies after a dissertation on the Black experience from some other discipline, but there are PhD programs in Black Studies. In this slide, I have categorized the three types of PhD degree options. First, fully independent departments able to grant their own degrees. Second, partnerships, legitimacy based on collaboration with some other department. And then lastly, a certificate, mainly coming out of a department that aggregates a certain number of courses. In all of this, theory is important. Now, there are many approaches to describing Black Studies theory. At one point, at the origin of Black Studies, in the late 60s and early 70s, we often thought of it in terms of the ideological polarity of Marxism versus nationalism. These ideological guides to practice are still in play, but they're not the main way, I think, to think about Black Studies theory from my point of view. I tend to think the main contrast is about where one begins, a priority of departure for the evaluation or summation of historical experience. Afrocentrism seeks understanding and clarity from origins, sometimes in ancient Africa and sometimes in traditional Africa. The argument is that there is autonomy to a historical heritage, a continuity of identity and culture that links African peoples from then until now. Alternatively, a Black experientialism theoretical orientation begins with some immediate African American experience at one point in time, now or any point in time, and then understands that experience in terms of what led to it and what came after it. Now, these people are good examples who take these alternative positions. On the Afrocentrist side are Karinga, Asante, Ama Mazama, and Linda James Myers. On the Black experiential side, there's Gerald Horn, Gates, Michelle Alexander, and Barbara Ransby. We could explore more of this in discussion, since I'm sure there's a lot of interest in what the hell I'm talking about. Now, my approach is to search for a way to unify the empirical and theoretical work in the field, not by proposing a synthesis or common agreement, but by proposing a way to understand and work with difference. In this framework I'm calling a paradigm of unity, it is possible to locate aspects of the Black experience in historical context. In these Cartesian spaces, one can then share alternatives, including data, concept, theories, toward a dialogue that can be inclusive of the field. The point is not to choose between different orientations, and of course, that of course will be done, but to understand the intellectual productivity of the discipline in some common ways of sharing what alternative perspectives we have. In this atmosphere, we need to take the negative energy and use it to leap forward faster. This is an urgent task, as there are systemic crises facing Black studies. Now I'm going to go into the crises that we're facing. We're losing the memory of the leadership of the founding generation. Here on this slide, Bertha Maxwell was the lead founder of the National Council for Black Studies. In the middle, Robert Christman was a founder of the Black Studies journal, Black Scholar. And James Turner, who for many decades was the head of the Black Studies unit at Cornell University after being a student leader of the Black Studies struggle at Northwestern University in Chicago. No founders currently lead academic programs or edit journals. The number who are active as emeritus faculty is declining. I'm one of the last founders standing, trying to press along and pass along the generational knowledge that we have. And I'm in my 80s. Now, secondly, it is precisely at this time that we are under attack. At this time, when we lack the institutional memory of how Black studies was connected to the Black liberation movement, a new generation has to learn how to fight and protect itself. The governor of Texas, Abbott, and Florida, DeSantis, have been the most out front voices attacking critical race theory, all forms of diversity, and any move against racist government practices. But check this map. The entire country is moving to the right with oppressive legislation. Of course, I give a shout out to DeSantis. I thank him, because when the devil steps out of the shadows and we can actually see it and nobody can deny the attacks that are coming at us, that might help wake up some brothers and sisters who need a little help. We need to decode the message. Attacking critical race theory is not about a few people or an individual scholar that use that concept. It's an assault on all of Black studies. This is political. But we also face technological issues and a paradigm shift. Another challenge we face is a systemic paradigm shift the universities are going through with AI, artificial intelligence. I think it's like the fast food industry. It's everywhere. It's quick, it's easy, seems to have value, and appears cheap. But if you make that your staple diet, you'll end up in the hospital. If we end up using AI as a substitute for developing our intellectual capacity, we will end up stupid and dependent on others to think for us. If we just include it as part of our toolkit, maybe we have a chance. But you have to think about it like the TV mainstream news, full of good and bad, so you have to double check everything you care about. There's no way to avoid using multiple sources before making up your mind about anything important. AI systems are biased as the data collected and used is a reflective of the institutional racism of corporate practice. The danger is that AI is so seductive. It's a paradigm shift that can soon become the new normal. Now check this out. I asked ChatGPT, why should I take Black Studies at McMaster University? Instantly, it spit out this answer. Enrolling in Black Studies at McMaster University in Canada offers an immersive exploration of the Black Canadian experience, examining historical narratives, cultural contributions, and contemporary challenges unique to this context. Through courses like Black Canadian History, Afro-diasporic literature, race, and identity, students engage with diverse perspectives and critical theories, fostering a deep understanding of systemic racism and social inequality. With faculty expertise and community partnerships, students have access in cutting-edge research and real-world experience, preparing them to become informed advocates for racial justice and equity. The program's interdisciplinary approach empowers students to navigate complex issues and contribute meaningfully to inclusive dialogues within academia and society. This is serious. You know what I mean? In other words, you could read this and agree with it, but if the tendency is then to count on AI continuing to replace our own intellectual development, that's where the danger lies. So let me give what my recommendation is in light of this new reality we're facing. I'm saying don't try to fight it. You remember what happened with Wikipedia? Academics said don't use it. Everybody was using it, including them. You know, we have to learn how to use the new things that are happening to us. So I offer these suggestions. First, ask GPT enough questions to where you get to the final response, I don't know. Because you will get that response, but you have to push it. That's the first thing. Second thing is compile the text you get and treat it as a first draft. Third, fact check. Multiple sources. Make sure you add yourself in the essay and not go with this generic text that might look good but not be you. And then finally, and this is really the key, be sure you can verbally kick it because it's in your head and it's what you believe. We had a little contest with high school students, and the sister got up. She couldn't read the essay. And she started laughing, confessing that was Chat GPT talking. That wasn't her. She couldn't even pronounce the words. So the question is, how do we get the students to become conversationalists about the knowledge and not just rely on machine-generated text? But I'm telling you, Chat GPT is in all our classrooms right now. And finally, while our community is under debilitating impact of class polarization, including many of our graduates, we have a political challenge to be relevant to social progress. This is summed up in the Black Studies slogan I developed for the National Council for Black Studies in 1977, academic excellence and social responsibility. Okay, now for my brief suggestions of what Canada can learn from us. Sometimes what we have to learn ourselves in the US. While we started out as a manifestation of social movement, activism, representing the community, we started out that way. We have evolved from the we into the me. Each faculty member or student being atomized into self-serving individuals delinked from the we. This means from the collective identity and function of each department and from the community. And what I've been hearing today is that the we has to be first and foremost the experience of being in Canada. All you all thinking about everywhere else, everybody here is in Canada. What is the Black experience in Canada? That's the reality that we all live. We all share that, no matter where you come from. That's the same problem in the US. The Black experience in the US is about redefining America. It's not trying to be somewhere else. We all live in New York and Detroit and Chicago. We have to struggle over that. And when somebody said, I don't want to speak for the university, we speak for the university, we speak for the United States. Who the hell else do you speak for? You all have to learn how to speak for Canada and redefine the Canadian experience. Otherwise, you are accepting being marginalized. And you can't allow that to happen. I got other things to say too. And I got to keep my place here. Okay, so that the we, the me. Another we is building collectivity on campus. We have now people who are in the US who are in their own individual research, and they lose the reality of the department and building and preserving the department. And then another we is building the community. There's a lot of we's you have to deal with me. I go to the doctor. When I talk to the doctor, I talk about me. Everybody here's got a certain budget. That's the me. But the we has to be connected always to the me. The second lesson, and this has been discussed, is making the concept of a public intellectual to be a two-way process, the campus and the community. The main way now, in the US anyway, is to give prominence to academics who are given access to mass media. Those are the public intellectuals. We have to include recruiting organic intellectuals from our community to speak with authority on the campus to impact our scholarship. Our community voices are now objects of our research. They must be subjects as partners that serve as our intellectual collaborators. Again, in the past, as a social movement, we channeled our ideologies into our academic practice, and this frequently put us in polemical tension with each other. This was especially sharp in the Marxist nationalist debate. Now the challenge is to rethink these ideologies as theories and make a norm the study of all theories of Black liberation that Black people have generated, leaving personal advocacy to one's personal life or one's movement that you're in. But for Black studies, anything that Black people have legitimated as a social tendency of intellectual thought is the proper study of Black studies, not to exclude. Who in the hell are we to try to exclude what Black people think and do? Our responsibility is to try to understand it. Comprehensive knowledge is our goal in Black studies, and with that approach, we best serve our people. But we must publish, not just as high-achieving individuals, but as a profession with methods that include everybody. To serve the people in these good jobs we have is to be productive as intellectual workers. Our community expects us to be high-achieving professionals, and collectively in our departments, we have to do that for each other. Because right now, we often leave brothers and sisters behind. And there's a real kind of stratification of the producing intellectuals and the people who are struggling to get tenure. We don't have collective processes that enable people to historically develop their capacity. I want to make two specific suggestions with regard to that. One is, every conference should produce proceedings. And I know I've discussed this with Sister Alpha and Rhonda. Digital tools make it easy, and the documentation of this conference really demonstrates that. But here's another suggestion. Every good lecture we do, and everybody here gives them, can produce a slaper. Now that's a new invention of mine. Slaper. S-L-A-P-E-R. S-L means PowerPoint slide. Aper means a paper, the transcription of what you say. And I got an example of a slaper here, if you want to check it. In other words, we need to use the technology that means if you say it, you can get an automatic transcription that can then be edited. So everybody can be producing, because you know we love to talk. And if we talk, we can produce texts. And so we really have to grab the technology and use it for us rather than be alienated and marginalized by it. On the other hand, of course, we have to negotiate the difference between publishing for an academic audience. There are gatekeepers, after all. But then also we have to publish for our community. See, what happened in Black Power is we redefined audience to include the community. We sought our validation and our legitimation from the community. But that didn't mean that as an academic profession we could ignore the gatekeepers. I wanted to say some things to some panelists who seemed to me to be not mindful of the realities of power that we face. Okay. But culture is important too. It's who we are and how we have some fun. We have been a transformative force in the society as music, language, food practices, clothing, and much more have really been inspired by Black people. So in sum, the future is possible. My conclusion is that Black studies is needed in the United States and Canada to make that future being possible. That's me and my sister on the right in the 1940s. Thank you for listening. I hope you have some comments.
Test. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Alkalimat. He told me to call him Abdul, but it's just so difficult. Yeah, we'll turn it to the audience, not really an audience, to the rest of the community to see if there's some questions. I'll be checking if there are any online as well. Anybody to start us off? Don't miss this chance, trust me. Still marinating. Okay, at the back.
Thank you so much. I have a question in regard to using technology to share knowledge with the community. Do you have examples of how, for example, videotaping has been used in the States to share knowledge within academia and community in the Black communities in the US? Yeah, that's the question. Thank you.
The question is, do I have anything to say about the sharing of knowledge between the community and the campus digitally?
Yeah, like examples of like.
Yeah. Yes, there are many examples. First, I have to say the examples are few and relatively isolated and have not become institutional practices. And by that, what I mean is that theoretically, if you put something online, it's available to everybody if it's not password protected. So that's important because now most Black Studies academic units and programs have some level of online presence. The real connection with the community comes through social media, especially Facebook, as a way in which not only does the campus, but the community uses that space, that gated community called Facebook. And one of the interesting developments that occurred in the United States is, everybody here knows about Wikipedia. Well, the wiki software was adapted to community use under the category Community Wiki. And communities began to take up the self-programming of a local wiki so that the things that were valued by a community, all kinds of clubs, all kinds of hobbies, all kinds of spatial recognition of park benches, etc. And of course, that became very, very democratic movement in the country. And that was then, a foundation thought it was important to generate enough money that they created a project of hoovering up all of the local wikis into their cloud. Now, the reason that's important is because freedom of the press in the past belonged to those who owned the press. You don't own a press, you're subject to other people. They control, they are press. Well, in the digital world, what was happening is local servers were becoming important. That meant local communities control the digital information. So hoovering up those local servers and creating the corporate cloud put the corporation back in control of things. A lot of universities do the same thing by having, for example, online curriculum, et cetera, under password protected. You have to belong to that campus to get access to that information. Well, what has happened is at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, they developed software called DSpace. DSpace is a tool that enables any given campus to archive everything and have the commitment to preserve it. So that means that if you're at a campus that has DSpace, like at the University of Illinois, it's called Ideals. University of Michigan, it's called Deep Blue. That means that all faculty and student work that is submitted can be preserved. If you're at a campus, like an HBCU or something, or some campus that doesn't have that digital capacity, your information will be forgotten. So we're creating the memory of the future by that kind of activity. But now back specifically to the question you asked. We had a project that was connected to this local history. So at the University of Illinois, you can actually Google eBlackCU. That's eBlack is the way we talk about Black studies in cyberspace. E-commerce, eBlack. That's us. That's you. Okay. So what we did was we recognized that there was a lot of information on campus that was about the community, but never reported back to the community. And so, you know, they became objects of research and not really even consumers of the results of that research. So we then gathered up all that kind of information and started digitizing it. Then on the other hand, we discovered that the Black community itself was trying to represent itself digitally by using Facebook. And of course, that means turning information over to them. And, you know, I'm talking about people who had, this one sister had thousands of pictures. I'm talking about serious people documenting their experience, putting up family histories, organizational history, church activities, et cetera. And so we tried to get a lot of them to transfer that information to this website that we're now hosting at the University of Illinois as part of the permanent commitment of the university. See, in other words, the alienation we feel about these institutions, right? They want you to feel alienated and to give up. Because when we say Black liberation, when we say anti-racism, that means transforming these institutions we're engaged in, and you can't escape the fact that you have to fight for it. And it's a struggle. And so when we win struggles, that means that the advancement of Black people is going forward. So eBlackCU is the best example I can give you where the campus and the community are sharing knowledge. This includes video, photos, text, any kind of information that you can find that's digital. You got an emeritus professor that's not in the classroom, so I love talking to you all.
Thank you for the talk. I just wanted to ask about the role of religion in all of this. If you can share more from personal experience and also from like the academic research side of things.
Maybe say that again.
Like the role of religion.
Religion?
Yeah.
Ah. What an interesting question. The interesting thing about the Black church, for example, is that it not only is sort of an a religious institution, which is really a function not only of faith and historical artifacts that are important reference points to any given religious tradition or belief system, they're cultural institutions. So what's interesting is that in Black studies on campus, one of the most important Black student organizations is the Black Gospel Choir. So that is a performance of the cultural basis that has always been a foundation for the survival of Black people. And so I want to emphasize that that remains universal in the Black community. But what is happening is that we're existing now in this transformative moment of the society, and it's happening in all aspects. So the old religious tradition, Baptist and Methodist in particular, even though most people can't really know the difference other than wherever your family was when you got born, you became a Baptist or a Methodist. They can't really describe the theological differences. But both of those, as well as all the others, are being now marginalized by the new church form, which is corporate. And so religion is changing. So what used to be the cultural basis of the community, where your mama and your auntie and everybody's in the choir, now in these Christian churches that are corporate, the choir is professional. They're paid. The ATM machine is in the lobby. And, so it's a different experience. What actually exists as the emergence. In the old churches, the grandmothers and the kids. In the new churches, you get people who are, in their 20s to their 50s. So, but the other thing is that the class struggle, and I don't think enough of this day has been spent on the class struggle. So when you all talk about community without mentioning class, you're not really being serious. Because from the majority of Black people, even in Canada, everybody sitting up here has a good job. That's the reality. And so the class struggle occurs in the churches. During the civil rights movement, some churches got involved in the struggle and some didn't. And there was struggle in those churches. Now, of course, we exist at a time when religion increasingly is connected to this right-wing fascist development. So there's a struggle over what would Jesus do? What is the nature of Islam? What is Jewish values when they've turned Jews in Israel into Nazis? So we're at a time when the struggle in religion is going on, and it's heated, and we can't ignore it. I mean, I'm not a very religious person, but I share the values of anybody who's truly a Christian. In other words, I believe I am my brother's keeper and my sister's keeper, and I hope you all feel that same way, at least while I'm in Canada. So anyway.
Okay, I'll get to you next. We're going to read a couple of questions from our online participants. One is putting you on the spot, so answer it however you'd like. Are you available to meet with Black student leaders in Canadian universities to speak to them about the importance of their role in this space? What day, what time?
You have to ask Alpha.
Okay. All right, I'll get you in his calendar. The second question is, can you speak more to the powers, this is sort of quoting, I think, what you said earlier. Can you speak more to the powers with which we must contend, please?
The
powers with which we must contend.
Yes.
Yeah.
See, I am coming out of the history that we've experienced in Black Studies. So we've gone through a lot of different stages. I mean, a lot of what's been said here is kind of deja vu. I mean, I remember the questions that you're dealing with. But I want to talk a little bit about the nature of the university. It's an organization. It's not just an imagination, it's an organization. And I know the US experience, I don't know the Canadian experience, but I assume there's some similarity. A lot of the conversation has been as if there are options that we have without taking into consideration the objective reality that we face. And when I talk about power, what I mean in the university is first and foremost budget. There are two kinds of budgets in the university. There's a line item that's part of the permanent institutional budget. Then there are pockets of money that are discretionary. And a lot of times an innovative program begins at the discretionary budget, which means that a dean or a provost can be very progressive, create a nice program, and then they leave and somebody else comes in and they change priorities. And your budget goes away. So in the United States, the reason why we started out in all these different committees, centers, programs, institutes, all of that, the tendency was to go toward a department, because the departments have permanent line items in the budget. So when you talk about departments, it's not just about the kind of conversation we were having, it's turf, it's power, it's control. What does a department do? First of all, the budget. Second of all, hiring of faculty. Second of all, tenuring of faculty, where the faculty then has to fight the upper administration, but the decision is not dependent on some other faculty. Creating courses, granting degrees, all of that is departmental. Without a department, you don't have power. And ultimately, that's what the game is about. You know, you all can talk about all the rest of it, but power is where the thing goes down. Another aspect of power is how many faculty do you have that can be dispersed to the committees of the university that make decisions? Again, power. So the discussion of allies is not, do they love us? Do they like us? Nobody deals, that's not real. What's real is, do we have something they need? Do they have something we need? Adam Clayton Powell was in Congress making deals with people who were in the Ku Klux Klan. You know, he wasn't asking them, do you like us? You know, he was saying, you need my vote, I need your vote. So we have to get real about what we do. We represent our community by fighting to change the university, not by being in it and acting like we're alienated from it and there's nothing we can do. Your responsibility is to change the university. That means power. Now, at the intellectual level, here's the other thing about all this talk about interdisciplinary and this and that and disciplines. Think about this. In today's world, the big questions are not being held within any given discipline. Take DNA research, for example. That's biology, that's chemistry, that's physics, that's computer science. All the big questions are forcing people out of these silos of disciplines into new ways of trying to communicate and aggregate what they know. And that's exactly what we're doing in terms of Black studies. It's obvious that we're talking about experience, and that means 360 degrees, you know, the fifth floor, perfect. That's what we're talking about. Does that mean you give up your disciplinary background? No. First of all, you got to get tenure. That's real. In other words, you have to be able to negotiate the way the game is structured. And yet, tenure then creates freedom to actually be what we want. But you can't just be what you want in the world, not only in the university, anywhere else. Most Black people want a job. And once you get the job, there are limitations to that job. And you have a choice. You can be in that job or you can walk. But most people who keep in a job then also do other things. I'm just trying to say, let's be absolutely transparent and honest about what life is really like. We are absolutely needed at this moment everywhere in the world. And when we talk about ourselves, and people talk about their identity, if you get real about Ethiopia, if you get real about Nigeria or Jamaica, you're talking about a world that we didn't know was coming. We're talking about a real challenge for justice and freedom and what it means to be a human being living a quality of life everywhere in the world. But like I said before, if you're in Canada, how are you going to be in Hamilton or Toronto and not know about the Black experience transgenerationally where you currently live? Because guess what? Wherever you're from, your kids are going to grow up as Black Canadians. This is going to be their home. And they're going to be connected to that historical development of all those people going all the way back. So when I'm listening to Black Canadian studies, it's not the same thing as African studies. Here's what we have to realize. African studies and Caribbean studies were created as colonial constructs. So there's a struggle within African studies, within Caribbean studies, to transform it from what serves the colonial masters to what serves the subjects of colonized people. That's different. We had African studies in the United States before Black studies, but it wasn't for the liberation of Africa. And so, we've got to really think about the history of all of these things. And don't forget the fact that when we say Black or we say Africa, those are abstractions. Those are really abstractions. And the abstraction is only meaningful on the basis of how many particularities you understand. You can't stay at the abstract level. You will learn nothing. How are you going to talk about Africa unless you talk about the specifics? That was the problem with Chancellor Williams' book, Destruction of Black Civilization. In other words, if you're in Nigeria, you're going to study the reality of Nigeria. If you're in Ghana, you're going to study the reality of Ghana. Anyway,
Hello. Thank you for your talk. I was wondering if you could comment on your involvement in OBAC and the violence and nonviolence that you might have experienced and your outlook on the civil rights movement.
Yeah, what an interesting experience. I'm in graduate school in the 1960s. And I'm working at the post office one summer. And so I get on a bus and I'm reading a book by Ashley Montagu called The Natural Superiority of Women. And a brother taps me on the shoulder and whispers in my ear, I knew Ashley Montagu. Whoa, it was Conrad Kent Rivers, the poet. He was also on his way to the post office. And so we got the same assignment and we got to talking, became close friends, and he really mentored me that summer. I really read Black literature that summer based on his mentorship. He introduced me to Hoyt Fuller, who was the editor of Negro Digest. And the three of us, became like a little posse, and they were older, and I was sort of their representative of the young militant generation. And so we founded a thing called the Chicago Committee for the Arts that led to OBASI, the Organization of Black American Culture. And the big breakthrough in OBASI was the summer of 1967. And as you might remember, early in that summer, Aretha came out with the tune, Respect. R-E-S-P-E-C-T, respect. And later that summer, the artist workshop of Obasi painted the Wall of Respect. And that became the beginning of the mural movement in the United States. And we had a literary workshop, a visual arts workshop. We didn't have a music workshop because the AACM, Association for the Study of for the Advancement of Creative Musicians, existed in Chicago. And it was part of that self-determined organization of musicians that occurred around the country at that time. And what's interesting is that that wall, which was created by artists, see, artists exist individually in their studios, like writers. You know, you're sitting there in front of your terminal and you're trying to write. It was the politics of the Black Power moment, Black Power, 1966. The Black Power moment is what pulled all those artists together to the wall. And it was after that that then they began to search for a common aesthetic, because the Black arts movement was driven by the debate about what is the Black aesthetic. And what's interesting about that is that a middle-class tendency in the Black arts movement was trying to make up and self-define the Black aesthetic. And what became obvious is maybe you ought to look at Black people and what they think is beautiful. Maybe that'll help you out. Like Jeff Donaldson was painting the picture of Nina Simone on the Wall of Respect. And the woman who lived across the street called him over and said, and I'm going to speak harshly at the moment, so close your ears if you don't want to hear it. And she said, look, I'm looking at that ugly motherfucker every day. Change that picture. The artists were shocked because what they discovered was that the Black community has aesthetic values. She had a sense of what she regarded as being beautiful. He did not have the freedom to impose his beauty, sense of beauty on her. Of course, he changed it and, and went into her house. The sister had a different color on every wall in her house. She had her own aesthetic. You see a brother walking down the street, he might have 3 or 4 different plaids on. From a certain aesthetic point of view, that's awful. From his point of view, he was laying sharp, So we have to really, that's what the artists discovered. Now in writing, what happened is that people were being successful and they became artists in residence. And then suddenly they shifted the audience from the community to the English department. And because they were the gatekeepers on the campus. And so that became a real struggle because the Black Power movement was about audience, self-reliance, and self-determination. So Obasi was about the expression of that Black Power moment. And the same thing happened in New York with Baraka and the Black theater that he had created in Harlem. Everywhere in the country, walls appeared everywhere. The musicians were organizing. The theater groups were organizing. The problem is that the moment you create something outside of the mainstream, as has been expressed, you got to pay for it. And that's hard. And when we talk about things like archiving, we're not talking about next week, even next year. We're talking about the next 50 years, the next 100 years. That means we have to fight to transform the society and not assume we can be outside the society as if some basketball player is going to pay for it and devote all their money to it. Those people are part of the system. Anybody making that kind of money is not free, whether it's Jay-Z or anybody else, to do anything they want with the money because the plug could be pulled on them anytime. We have to fight to change the society. There is no escaping it.
Hi. Hello? Please clap for him. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind going to your second slide so I can ask this question and hear your thoughts about erasure. And specifically, it's the one with the map, and you have the arrows for the you're almost there. Thank you. Yes, the Underground Railroad slide. So as an Indigenous studies scholar, as an Indigenous person from the Southwest of what is now the United States, and also my maternal grandfather's family comes from a place that was once called Indian Territory. And I know this isn't your map. I know where you got it from. I'm not criticizing the map, or I'm not criticizing you for making the map. But right there it says uncategorized territory. That is now the state of Oklahoma, and that was once Indian Territory. And what I find really interesting about this time in 1830s is that not only were removals going up and down for the Underground Railroad, but they were going east to west, because of the removal of indigenous peoples, which was policy by Andrew Jackson's racist regime. And I'm guessing, one of the things that we struggle with is that probably quietly before 2020, but really loudly after 2020, is sort of, finding these alliances between Indigenous studies and Black studies in ways that are mutual and reciprocal. And so when I see stuff like this, I notice this in the erasure of Indigenous peoples. And today has been fantastic. I mean, there's been a lot of Indigenous presence spoken. Toronto with the K. I have a hard time saying it. As the original way for this place. And I guess I saw this, and shortly after, I think you said, if you don't document, it doesn't exist. And so, I guess what are your thoughts on changing that, adding those collaborations and making it in the perspective that our alliances are very visible, because of what's happening there's so much happening at this time. And I see Indigenous erasure in so many places because our numbers as Indigenous peoples are a lot lower.
Well, first of all, let me just say thank you for that criticism. It's important, what you said. I usually use these maps in order to criticize these maps because it looks like there were these established trails of the Underground Railroad. The Illinois State Legislature has just passed a bill to establish a permanent commission on the Underground Railroad. And I'm part of that process. And the struggle is over this whole question of the established trails, which really document the allies of the freedom seekers, because that's what can be documented, versus focusing on the freedom seekers themselves as the real subjects of the Underground Railroad. And so the actual map would probably include all of the space from the south to the north, as well as to Mexico and to the west, because people were going every which way. And one of the main things would be, and I always think of this in terms of the historical imagination, trying to put myself in the process. If I was a freedom seeker during the time of slavery, I'd be looking for other Black people myself. And I wouldn't be looking for some abstraction called an ally. Now, it's a risk, no matter who you talk to, but you would be going every which way. And so the reconstruction of the Underground Railroad might be to find those places where Black collective living existed. But on the question of the indigenous people, my great-great-grandfather, who was in Illinois, from Kentucky to Illinois, he went back to Kentucky, eventually purchased 16 family members out of slavery. And one can only imagine this African-American who didn't know how to read and write, traveling in a wagon by himself to go to Kentucky from Illinois, obviously had to pass through land that was occupied by people. You know, it wasn't empty. So again, the question of, well, what was the relationship? You know, what trails did he follow? You know, what markers did he have? What knowledge did he have to have in order to travel? And so that really raises the question of what was his relationship to the indigenous population that he had to, you know, their space that he had to travel through. And again, these are not answers, these are simply questions. But one of the interesting things is that in the US, we don't have equality between the Black Studies programs and what are called Native American programs. And this is really a very interesting and serious issue on campus. Because the research needed is from both areas. So what you're forcing me to do is to start talking to people about what kind of maps we can come up with, what kind of ways to name space that is respectful of the pre-colonial experience. You know, what is this called? You know, what is the name of this? And that's important. Again, it's easy for us to not even know when we're operating under a framework that, if pointed out, we would detest. You know, we act out the colonial logic because that's the knowledge we have in our head. So I appreciate the criticism, and I'm not going to use that slide anymore.
Thank you. So, of course, we are behind. We're not behind. We're forward. But there are a couple of online questions that have emerged. One that I'm just going to say out loud, but I think we can maybe take it up in the next panel. This comes from Shirin, who says, what are some actionable steps you can give us for taking up the work of the elders? And Shirin says, I am a community educator, not an academic, so I may not qualify. You absolutely do. So thank you for sharing that question, and I think maybe we can take that up because the last panel, the goal is to build on this conversation and to collectively think about what our next steps might be. But Rhonda said I had no choice. We have to ask this question, even though we're behind. And I think particularly because it's so apt here at McMaster, I've spoken to you a little bit already about the focus and around the health sciences at McMaster. And so I think this is an important question to ask here in particular. What is the role of Black studies in life sciences, including the curriculum, objectives of the department, et cetera? In a couple of minutes, if you can speak to some of that. And I know you already began some of this conversation with students at the Black Student Success Center yesterday, and so maybe you can draw on some of the conversation there.
Just to
say it again. Okay, sorry, I'm talking fast. What is the role of Black studies in the life sciences and health sciences?
What an interesting question. The difference in general of health studies is that we're dealing with life and death. That's kind of a serious and immediate reality that mistakes can have serious consequences, and sometimes we don't see that in what we do. I mentioned something that really caused a surprise among the students, that in the United States, the federal government had legitimated a drug only for Black people. Just let that sink in for a minute. Called Badil. It has to do with hearts. And I don't know about you all, but if I went into a drugstore and I saw a wall of drugs and it said, this is only for Black people, I wouldn't take none of it. You know, I don't want to be an experiment, you know. In that instance, it really would take Black studies professionals to critique the process by which the government actually approved of that drug. Because in a national survey, a national sample, the results weren't coming out. And so they created a subsample that they could get to validate that drug. And then they paid some Black doctors to write it up and got a section of the Black middle class to approve it. So that's an example of how the pharmaceutical industry, and all aspects of healthcare are not separate from their social and cultural environment. Even medical schools learned that doctors had to know more than organic chemistry, which is the class that they weed out people when they want to narrow the path to medical school. Because you're treating human beings. I mean, I was in the hospital at Meharry Medical College, and they were serving full 3-course meals. And I said, I'm laid up in the hospital. I can't eat all this food. The dietitian came to me and said, look, you see those people over there? I want them to get well. I have to feed them what they're willing to eat. I know what you're talking about. I could serve you some Jell-O if you want it. So you're serving human beings. There's a cultural and social reality to that. That contextualizes all the healthcare that can go in. It's not just about chemistry. It's about people. The same thing is true about everything. We went to the NIA Center in Toronto, and the sister who was taking us around pointed to the computer lab that had interior design as a class. And I thought that was wonderful, except what she didn't make clear is, who are you designing this for? I mean, she did something that you would find on some real estate site, looking at apartments, etc. There's a skill to that, but it would have been different had, for example, she said, we took this class and we went to social housing, we went through 20 apartments, and we had a budget, and we designed their space within that budget for those people. That's a whole different way of approaching interior design. Because who are you designing for? And that's where class comes in. That's where urban-rural comes in. That's where culture and ethnicity, all of that comes in. So I think this whole question of how Black studies feeds into all of this is really critical. The same thing is true for all aspects of engineering, all aspects of computer science, all aspects of everything. Here's the interesting thing about this engineering business. In the Soviet Union, 1917, Cuba, 1959, engineers became the leading profession for transforming society out of those revolutionary experiences. And because socialism and capitalism were both political processes to maximize industrialization. That's what was going on. What did Lenin say? Electricity is communism. Make every factory a fortress. They were trying to industrialize to increase production to impact quality of life of people in the Soviet Union. So the point I'm trying to make here is that didn't work. It worked a lot, but it didn't work completely because you need sociologists. You need people who know about human beings and not just technology. Technology won't save us. All of us need to save us. That's really critical. So this idea of isolating any silo and any discipline independent of others just won't work, hasn't worked. I mean, they built the atomic bomb thinking that was going to help. They gave the Nobel Prize, or the guy who started it, dynamite. Come on. I mean, we got to talk to each other frankly about all these things. But anyway, my main line is, we need Black studies.